have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Don Smith today about the development analysis for D20, which is always a great wealth of information. Let's see. Mr. Reitwieser is here today for a building fund update, and Ms. Allen will talk to us a little bit about the federal impact aid forms, as well as the budget impact of COVID. And then Mr. Gregory will give us an update about returning to learn and where we are with that. If anybody has any questions, I do think that they are best in the chat, but if you guys want to ask them at the end of a presentation, please feel free to unmute yourself at any time and ask them live. And Mr. Gregory's questions probably would be best in the very end to make sure that we have time for everyone. You guys are all right with that. We'll go ahead and get started today with Mr. Temby, our Board of Education representative.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Let me see if I can get a presentation up here. Is that up or not?
Not yet.
So as Ann's pulling that up, what I thought would be helpful to everybody, everybody's pretty engaged, but is just to know what occurs with the Board of Education between meetings. And so, all right, so Ann, I'm trying to.
Can you see it?
Yeah. Yes, that's great. So I thought I would share what's happened since we last met, albeit virtually. And so, Ann, if you want to just go to the next slide. Oh. Okay. So we've had 3 board meetings since we last met. We had a meeting on September 3rd, September 17th, and October 1st. And fairly full agendas there. We also had 1 board work session on October 1st, and the main content there was to get a couple updates from Tom Gregory, but also to start talking about a student linkage that we're aiming to do at the end of October, early November, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And at least once a month, we intend to do what's called a spotlight, which precedes the board meeting. And so we did a spotlight that featured Mountain View Elementary School and Chinook Trail Middle School. And they kind of, each school is given an opportunity to talk about things that are important to them, or a curriculum issue, or a presentation that may involve the arts. So we had a couple of good presentations from those schools just before our last meeting at 5 o'clock. And then one thing that's really the essence of why I joined the Board of Education is to be in the schools and to see what's going on, interact and support our administrators and educators. And so the last week of September and the first week of October, the board split up with a member of the cabinet, and you can see how those teams were formed. And we visited our liaison schools. And so when I say our liaison schools, each board member is assigned somewhere between 7 and 9 schools that they interact with for the entire school year. The cabinet is not assigned those same schools, but we went out with cabinet members and did visits to all the schools. And I headed out with Shelley Kuzer on the 29th of September and visited 8 schools. So, and next slide would be great. So these are just some of the highlights from the meetings. I will say, and it's listed on a subsequent slide, but we do spend quite a bit of time going through the policies and monitoring reports For the district, we are a policy setting board. So we spend quite a bit of time reviewing on a rotational basis over kind of a 1 to 2 year period, almost every policy within the district, and certainly board policies. And then augmenting that every meeting are typically several presentations. And so some of the things that we've gone through, if go back one slide. Yeah, thank you. The new licensed staff members go through an orientation each year. So we did get an update as to what happened at that orientation. Henry gave coming out of the summer at our first September meeting, he gave an update on what was accomplished over the summer in terms of the capital projects. Every year we review the Fair Campaign Practices Act. Tanya Thompson gives us a review of that just so everybody understands what can happen during election seasons, regardless of whether it's a general election or any off-season election. We did talk quite a bit about a Board of Education fall linkage, and that is going to be very student focused. I think I mentioned at the last meeting that the district has gotten some very significant feedback from students who have either matriculated through the system or still reside in the system about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, and Tom can speak about this in a little bit greater detail, but it's our intention to break up into teams, meet with students at schools, and really talk about this issue in some great detail. And so our intention at the end of this month and early November is to really take a much deeper dive into getting very transparent and open feedback from our students about their perceptions and the realities within the district around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, this is a key initiative for Tom, and I'll let him talk about that. Henry, once a month, gives us a building fund update, which you will see shortly. The most updated presentation. Next slide, Ann. We did get an update on the 2020 summer school. Just a note, typical attendance at all the sessions during summer school would be probably north of 1,800 to 1,900 students. This past year, because of COVID, I think Tom can correct me, but I think it was around 595 students were able to go through programs because obviously we had to truncate some of the things that we normally do. But we still did get 595 kids through enrichment programs, remedial programs over the summer. You're about to see from Dawn, who is the expert, the residential development analysis report. We did see that report a meeting or two ago. Tom has talked about his initiatives really starting last year in his first year as superintendent, and he gave us an update, and I'm sure he'll be talking about that. Becky Allen always does a tremendous job sharing a monthly financial report with us and puts in layperson terms some pretty complex school finance and finance information to us, and so we always appreciate Becky's thoroughness. We are members of the Colorado Association of School Boards, which is kind of a association of, I believe, every single school district in the state belongs to CASB, and that is 178 school districts. And so feedback emanates from the school districts to CASB to their legislative people, and they develop resolutions of things that really serve as their lobbying ideas and thoughts as they head into the legislative session. So we did review some of those resolutions to see if we concurred with them or not, and pass that along to CASB, and that happened in our last meeting. We did see the 2020 Project Alert Survey, which is a student drug and alcohol survey, and the results were shared with us, and they're pretty illuminating. This is a every 2-year survey of 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. and really takes a fairly deep dive into drug, alcohol use, reactions to it, the advent of vaping and prescription medicine on top of things that have traditionally been surveyed. It was pretty illuminating information, and I don't know if that's scheduled for the parent sounding board, but it certainly is interesting data. Next slide, Ann. And every year, one of the two committees of the Board of Education and required by the Department of Education are the District Accountability Committee. That is not unique to District 20. Every school district is required to have a District Accountability Committee and an Audit Committee. And every year the board approves the roster coming off August, and when it's more fully populated in September, we agree to the membership each year. And then, as I mentioned, we go through a regular rotational review of district policies and monitoring reports at every meeting. And I believe that is it. So unless there's any questions, you can always reach me at will.temby@asd20.org. And on the website, my phone number is listed, and happy to hear from anybody and respond as quickly as possible. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Mr. Timby. I was writing a question that one of the parents wanted me to ask. Is the last day of the school year pretty set in stone, or do you see the potential of possibly extending it?
Well, I may defer to our superintendent, but I think one thing that has come out of our greater use of remote learning and its confluence with snow days is the potential that snow days may morph into more productive days than a day off. And so we always run into having a minimum number of days in class, and I think it's 186. And if snow days exceed, I believe, kind of an allocation of 5, that potentially could change the end of the school year calendar. So we're feeling as though with the ability to maybe do some remote learning on snow days and kind of set a new direction for those, that's really not going to be as big an issue. So there is a pretty good chance that the end of the school year could be exactly as scheduled. But in this crazy 2020, I don't want to guarantee anything, nor do I want to speak for our superintendent. So maybe Tom can address that question.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate your report. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
Mr. Gregory, can you give us an update?
Sure. Thank you, Heather. Just real quickly, following up on that question, what Mr. Timby replied with is essentially exactly the same thing I would say. I guess a few more details. As you know, we delayed the start of the school year by a week because back at that time, our data was much different than it is today. But that essentially, and we didn't change we delayed the start of the school year by a week, but didn't move the end of the school year. So essentially, one way to think about that is by delaying the start of school by 5 days, we consumed all of our snow days that were in the calendar, essentially that first week, which allowed us not to move the last day of school back any further. But as Mr. Timby said, some of the discussions around snow days, which in fact we just had one this morning, about what that might look like for this year or while we're in this environment, or potentially into the future after this environment, will determine some of that also. And then lastly, I would say the time requirement for students. As you know, last year there was a waiver that we were granted because of the last quarter of the year was so crazy. I don't know if it's less crazy now than it was then, other than attendance is a little bit more formal now than it was last spring. In short, I would say that we're going to plan on keeping that last day of school as close to or remaining as what it is on the calendar as possible. Just because there's Tom's way of saying it was, show us some grace here across Colorado. It's holding us accountable to some number of days, which first of all is somewhat artificial and random and has nothing to do with learning. It's just a matter of seat time. And second, school districts across the state of Colorado are all operating in very different environments. So to hold that standard the same to all is going to be challenging this year. So a little bit longer answer than maybe you wanted, but that's those are all the components involved. First of all, I'd like to say is we always say education is a partnership between parents and schools. But thank you, because no more than this year has that been played out. Certainly this year, it is almost a requirement that parents are involved in their students' education, especially at the younger grades, and especially if you're at Journey K-8, because it's almost, or it's not almost, it is a requirement that parents are involved in that online environment. So no more than ever before, that partnership between schools and parents is very, very essential. And thank you for your support in that. Just quickly, I won't give any details, but some of the topics that are important right now, and we're discussing at the district level, along with principals. One was parent-teacher conferences, and I'm not sure if you've heard anything about parent-teacher conferences yet, but you could expect that they will probably be of the virtual nature or using Microsoft Teams in a scheduled way. So those of you who are secondary students, going to the arena type thing where you wait in line to see a teacher won't need to happen, because it'll be more of a scheduled virtual conference, unless there's a request by either the teacher or parent to meet face-to-face. We're nearing the end of that first quarter, which means, as we communicated way back in July and August, that we were requesting that parents who made the choice to go to an online program or Journey K-8 or stay in the schools in person and put off the decision to go to online or Journey K-8. We asked that they maintain the first quarter or wait for that transition to happen until the second quarter starts. Well, we're nearly at that time now. So within the next couple of weeks here, as we end the first quarter and begin the second quarter, we'll see multiple hundreds of students transition either from their bricks and mortar school that they're attending now in person to a program like Journey K-8, or vice versa, from Journey K back to the bricks and mortar school. And right now the numbers across the district, I'm going to give an estimated number, but it's about 600 students total, give or take, that are going one direction or the other. The majority of those are going from the Journey K-8 or from an online program, returning back to school, the brick and mortar school. But there's a small portion that are going the other direction, from the brick and mortar school to Journey K-8. We are, at this point, it's kind of water under the bridge, but we have been watching enrollment this whole time. And I know Becky's going to talk about budget a little bit later, but our enrollment is probably going to end somewhere around 900 students under what we projected. And that is fairly consistent with what's happening not only across the Pikes Peak region, but across the state of Colorado. What I call unaccounted for kids. There are students that certainly are homeschool, the parents who registered their kids for a homeschool environment. We account for those kids, but there's just a lot of kids out there that aren't in school. They're not, as far as we can tell, in an online program. They may have gone the private school route. We wouldn't know that for sure. But certainly in the Pikes Peak region, the estimate right now is somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 students that are unaccounted for. And I don't think our private schools in the area can manage taking on 4,000 to 5,000 more students. So I think there's just a lot of students, as the governor said last week or the week before. I think there's just a lot of kids out there that are staying home for a while, and they're just unaccounted for. And we'd like them to enroll, even if it's register as a homeschool student. At least you're accounted for, and you're complying with state statute and the compulsory attendance laws in Colorado. We're having discussions at the secondary level around the use of the Wednesdays in conjunction with teachers to make sure the Wednesdays are, essentially what that's coming from is the 8-period day crunched into about 4 hours is problematic. I met with my student group this morning, and they don't like it at all. Racing through 8 periods in an afternoon just doesn't feel like a best use of time. I think teachers are feeling the same way. So maybe there's a way to do handle those Wednesdays a little bit differently, where it allows for students to meet in small groups or individually with teachers on an as-needed basis, or teachers to meet with students they want to meet with on an as-needed basis, versus racing through an 8-period schedule or some other kind of schedule that doesn't seem to provide the best benefit. As we alluded to earlier, we're talking about snow days and how snow days might look for this year, and included in that might be late starts. We're talking a lot about the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative that I have, and Mr. Tempe referenced that a little bit earlier. Just a quick update on that. We have started the first phase of that, which is to get a third-party vendor to kind of review what's happening in our district, look at data in our district, look at our policies. And when I say data, it's all kinds of data. Achievement data, academic achievement, academic growth, may include discipline, it may include course enrollments, it may include success and failure rates, post-secondary enrollments or opportunities. But look at all of that data, and including potentially the data that the Board of Education receives when they start meeting with our students at the end of October and the beginning of November. And really that's focused on individual student experiences and perceptions. Then of course, one thing that's probably on everybody's mind, certainly on my mind, is a question of when or if we can ever return to students attending school every day in person. And I would just say that there is no single metric that says, aha, we've reached that point, and whatever metric it is, we can now put our students back in school every single day in person. As I said earlier, this year, there are really 3 metrics that come from the El Paso County Health Department that we monitor: the 14-day rolling average for new cases, which is on the El Paso County Health Department data dashboard. 14-day rolling average for new cases, hospitalization and hospital capacity, which is good in El Paso County right now, but rising across the state. We look at the test positivity rate. So of all the COVID tests that are submitted or administered, how many of those come back positive? Right now, we're in a good place with that in El Paso County. It's about 2.8%, I think, as of yesterday. Then a couple other things that are a little bit more challenging to measure, and that is staffing. Can we staff all students returning to school every day? And what impact might that have on decisions our staff, especially our teachers, might make? We have no unions in this district. There is no collective bargaining agreement. There is no master agreement. But we want healthy climate, healthy relationships between our administration, our teachers, our parents, and our students. So it's not something that we ignore, and in fact, we can't ignore it. And what that means is if teachers don't feel safe having 30 students in their classroom at the high school level, and it forces them to make a decision to stay in education or leave education, we have to consider that, because welcoming all students back to class every day, but not having a qualified teacher in the classroom I think does us more harm than it does good. So, and I had that discussion with students this morning also. So that certainly weighs heavy on the decision also. I think with that, Ms. Henneman, I will end, and certainly that gives some topics maybe for some questions later on. I'd be happy to answer those at that time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Gregory. We appreciate your update. Now we'll have Mr. Smith come on, and he's going to give us a residential update for the D20 area. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Good afternoon. You can imagine at my advanced age, this distance learning thing has been a very steep learning curve. So let's see if I can get this up and running for you.
If we can help you in any way, please just let us know.
Okay, if not, I think Becky may be standing by. I'm not sure.
Great.
Don, would you like me to share my screen? I have it up.
Oh, thanks. I would appreciate that.
Yeah.
Can I control that from here, Ann?
No, just let me know when to move on.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Can you see it?
Go to the next slide. Just some sample headlines coming out of the Gazette-Telegraph regarding the local economy. You'll note that for some reason, the housing market in the area has stayed extremely strong. The pandemic has had a very, very minimal effect regarding the building of new housing and also the sales of existing housing. Next slide, please. You'll note from the charts we have here that the unemployment rate in the El Paso County area, Colorado Springs area specifically, has stayed just about the same and mirrored the national and the Colorado averages. The chart at the bottom shows the tax rates that were collected by the city of Colorado Springs. And even though we're behind, one would think that this could have been far worse. So hopefully we can rebound and we can bring these back closer to normal towards the end of the year. One thing that's really surprising, if you look at the foreclosure data on the chart at the right, it's extremely low. And these foreclosure, of course, is when people can't pay their mortgage and they're getting ready to repossess their homes. People have been very diligent in making sure that they're up to date in their mortgage payments. Next slide, please. This just shows an example of comparison of the building permits for residential construction in El Paso County, the left chart from 2004 to 2019. So you can see we've remained really strong. On the right side is the building permits through June that were issued by the building department for residential construction. And you can see that we're ahead of last year, a little behind 2018, but we've made up that gap and we're now on a record pace. Next slide, please. What does the future hold? Well, I guess it's kind of anyone's guess. If we get a flare up in the number of pandemic cases, it's going to be a problem in the development of the economy. The ability to develop and distribute a vaccine in the near future or therapeutics is critical. Of course, we're in a contentious national election season. And as Mr. Gregory mentioned, the number of students that return in-person learning during the health crisis and beyond could have an effect. It could be such a thing that distance learning really becomes the thing of the future. So predictions regarding future growth in the district are just a snapshot of what's going on right now. Next slide, please. Commercial development along the Interquest Parkway, specifically in the district, is really showing some progress and increasing the tax base, of course, in the district. Next slide, please. I'll share with you just a few of those. This is the new Interquest as far as Shields sporting goods store that's coming in. One of the students this morning did say that he had been in a Shields and said it was quite a place. Actually, we'll have a Ferris wheel type operation within the building. They're hiring at the present time, going to hire up to 350 employees and plan on opening in March of 21. They've actually set up a hiring center over in the old Classic building off of Corporate Drive. Next slide, please. This is the new In-N-Out Burger. On the left, you see what was going on out there in 2019, now in 2020. And when I drove by the other day, I noticed this is now a white stucco facility. Next slide. The nice looking building with all the arches that's directly east of the In-N-Out Burger, straight across this Interquest from Pikes Peak Community College, that's the new headquarters building for In-N-Out Burger for the entire region. And this is also where they'll produce the patties for the restaurant operation. And I would note they've already signed for a new store in Denver and another one in Colorado Springs since they started building the store in District 20. Next slide, please. This is the new Ent building. On the left was the rendering we had in 2019. And if you look at the right slide, that's what's going on out there right now. They've made significant progress on this facility. And as I mentioned last year, that they've got plenty of room to add a couple additional buildings if their growth continues. Next slide, please. The picture at the top is the office complex that was sitting empty and just a skeleton of a building on the southeast corner of Interquest and Voyager. This building has been purchased, being converted into an office complex. And at the bottom, you see the Icon Theater. That's the sloping building in the left background of the picture. The largest screen in Colorado. And I did note some of the kids had already been there and said it was quite spectacular. Next slide, please. Number of other things coming along Interquest. Of course, once you build one fast food restaurant, the others want some of the action as well. So there's a Slim Chicken, a Panda Express, some hotels coming up in that area, the townhomes that are being built behind the theater complex. And there were going to be 2 medical buildings and a wellness hotel that was going to be built in Victory Ridge. They have pulled off of that plan and they're going to move down. They're going to build about a 65,000 square foot facility directly across from the site that's going to be the new Penrose Hospital site, which is on the vacant land that sits on the southeast corner of I-25 and Interquest. So they haven't left the area, they're just moving down so they can have more immediate access to the hospital. Next slide, please. This is the new interchange that's going in on I-25 where we have a little jog in the road right now. The construction of this is about half done. This will provide access on and off directly from the Polaris Point development. It will end at Voyager. And at this point in time, there's no money available to continue on and complete Powers, which will actually someday loop up and join into this particular interchange. Next slide, please. A couple of things going on over in Polaris Point that some people are really excited about. One is the future driving range that you see in the right picture. It's about a 53,000 square foot facility, which is the size of approximately an elementary school in the district. And on the other left side, you see where Air City or Trampoline Center is also coming into Polaris Point. These are right over by the Bass Pro area. Next slide, please. This we saw last year. I shared with you the wing-shaped building. On the picture is actually a rendering of the new Air Force Academy Visitor Center. And as I mentioned last year, whoever did the rendering, the mountains are kind of in the wrong side of the picture here because the facility actually sits west of I-25. There'll also be a hotel in there. There's a number of office buildings. They tried to sell the bonds for this project in March and didn't have any takers, so they're going back again in October because their land agreement with the Air Force, they have to get the bonds sold this year and finish the construction by 2023. So they'll be moving forward with that as soon as possible. Next slide, please. This is the new Flying Horse North Golf Course, which is now open to members. And also a number of homes have been built out in that area already. A portion of Flying Horse North is in District 20, but the majority of the homes out there will be in District 49. Next slide, please. Other commercial activity in the district, there's a number of things going on. There's a Chili's, another Comfort Inn that's coming over on Kelly Johnson Goddard, must be about complete now. One of the significant things there is another medical building, almost 64,000 square feet, that's going to go over by facilities that are already located on the northeast corner of Research Parkway and Chapel Hills. And I think we'll see more of this medical office type building structure in the district as the plans for the hospital become more firm. Next slide, please. As far as methodology, how I looked at putting together the projections from now till 2024 is I contacted all the developers in the district that were doing residential construction from January to March, actually ended up May, as some of the larger developers said, hey, wait a minute, we talked to you in March, we want to talk to you again, see what the pandemic's going to do. But I can tell you that all my conversations with them, they're struggling to stay ahead. They just can't get the streets, utilities, asphalt laid quick enough for the sale of lots that they're experiencing. Projections I also got from Davis Demographics. They do demographic work in the district and work with boundary changes and so forth. And also from the U.S. Census, of course, it's a 2010 census, but they update every year the number of residential units that they're anticipating to be built in a metropolitan area. Then I also looked at the average number of new residential units completed in the district over the last 5 years. Next one, please. And from that, you can see up at the top what was projected to be built in 2019. And we fell a little short on the actually built. We had 1,019 projected for single families, and we actually completed 740. And that was pretty well spread across all of them, from Wolf Ranch clear up into Cordera. Not so much into Farm and North Fork. They just seem to be meeting projections or exceeding every year. But over the years, as I mentioned in the past, these developers have been very, very accurate. They've been over 93% correct. When you go back to 2007 and follow it through. So we really appreciate their help. Below that, you see the residential units projected to be completed in the next 5 years. And I'll go into these in a little more detail as we move forward. And at the bottom in the red, you see the student yield, with the single family now yielding not quite 7/10 of a student. Back a few years ago, that was 3/4 of a student. It slipped a little bit. And we feel this may continue to slide a little bit as the district ages, then the price of housing continues to increase in the district. Next slide, please. This just shows the projected and completed. And if you look out past 2020 and you say, man, you look at that blue line for single residential construction, is really going to taper off. Well, what you have to think about is we're going to have some major things taking place here in the next year or two. One will be Cordera. Is going to be close to nearly built out and probably fully built out in a couple of years. The same thing is true up at North Fork and also for the Farm. La Plata Investments, who had developed all of Briargate, if you envision that entire area, filed their last filing for master plan or for development within the Briargate master plan here about a month ago over in Cordera. And that's the last plan that they have for the Briargate area. So we will see some downturn there. One thing that's going to affect this out in the future, and we'll talk a little more about it when we get to Sterling Ranch, and it is the fact that they're going to start developing much more quickly. And so we'll probably see that blue line jump back up again. Next slide, please. Can I get the next? Thanks, Ann. And these are what I did is I looked at the scenarios that I had mentioned to you with projections from the Census Bureau and the demographer, what we had done on a 5-year average and so forth. And what I did is I took the one that was going to generate the most students, which is the new housing that developers mentioned to me that they plan to do between now and 2024. So taking a look at that, looking at the number of single family attached, multifamily, and using our student yield, you can see that we're talking about 3,800 students over the next 5 years. And of course, the other thing we have to take into consideration is the fact that, man, we're down considerably this year from where we were last year, which is going to affect these numbers as we go forward if all those students don't return to full-time learning in the district. Next slide, please. We can go to the next slide. We did this by study area, the same as we've done in the past. And that way we can take, even though we know we're not a feeder school system, elementary A goes to middle school B, high school C, because we have choice. But this gives us a broad look at a specific area in the district to see what's happening in there and whether or not we're going to have need for seats available. I use the on the left side of the chart are the planned new construction, the single family attached, which is actually townhome or duplex and multifamily, and then how many students are we going to generate? Well, you can see that out through 2024, we're not going to generate very many in the Air Academy High School district or area because there's very little room for growth on the west side of the district. Next slide, please. Discovery Canyon High School. This is the new school site elementary proposed at the farm. We do not own this site. La Plata has set that aside for us for use in the future. That'd be just north of Interquest and Voyager along the entrance into the farm development. Next slide, please. This was just a layout that we had considered for that site in order to see if it would fit appropriately. And of course, it comes down to when we actually build what that'll actually look like. But we wanted to make sure that we had that in the planning process to kind of see where we'll be down the road. Next slide, please. This is the area out on Highway 83 in Shoup we've mentioned in the past, and it sits to the southeast of that particular intersection. And you say, well, man, that's way out in the country. Well, it is, but there's an old master plan in there for 1,750 single-family homes. And in the old master plan, there are a couple of school sites that have been designated in that area. And when you look at that area and say it's quite a ways north, think about Pine Creek High School and what's going on over there in the development around Pine Creek High School, and then North Fork, and then right behind North Fork, we're going to get about another 380 single-family homes is Kettle Creek North. So by the time you finish Kettle Creek North, you'll be able to look right across the creek structure out there and you'll be able to see this property on Shoup. So it's really not that far away anymore. Next slide, please. This is the Discovery Canyon area. Now, if we look at those single family projected new construction, you notice how it's pretty significant after looking at the Air Academy area. And when we go down through, calculate how many students we're going to get over the next 5 years. And then on the right side, let's go clear over to the seats available in 2024. If we've got a negative number there, that means we're going to have some need in that particular area for seats. So we'll keep that in consideration. What I'm going to do is when we come towards the end here, we'll pull this all together on a summary, and it'll show you exactly what's going on district-wide. Next slide, please. We can go to the next one, Ann. This was standing in front of Legacy Peak on the right side in 2019, looking off into Wolf Ranch. The left picture, you can see there's quite a few more homes over there, and they're actually moving dirt almost all the way up to the trees in Black Forest and that over on that side of Wolf Ranch. Next slide, please. Sterling Ranch, this is the development that's out off of Vollmer, which is east of Black Forest Road. Top picture, you see very little was going on out there in 2019, but you look down to 2020 and there are houses as far as we can see. And if to the right of this picture that we're looking at the bottom of that screen, there's all kinds of dirt being moved, curb and gutter being installed. So they're anticipating some significant growth in that area. Next slide. This is the sketch plan. The diagonal dark line that you see going across the picture is actually, that is Vollmer. And when you go over to the east side here, this is the district boundary. And there's about 2,900 single family homes that are planned in our district. And to the east of that line is District 49, and there's approximately another 2,900 planned in that area. The two little blue circles that you see on the diagram are school sites that have been reserved. We have formally asked that the smaller school site be reserved by the county at this point in time so that we have a site for future growth. That would be a pre-K5 or pre-K5 site, and the larger blue circle is anticipated as a pre-K8 site. So like I say, there's a little lesser priced homes, and we expect we may get a lot of younger children out of this particular area. Next slide, please. This is the pre-K5 site proposed out in Sterling Ranch. You can see right next to the houses to the right. But like most of our sites, great view of Pikes Peak there to the west. Next slide, please. This is the Cumber Vista site we've mentioned in the past. This is over just northeast of Powers and Woodman. This is the only site that the district actually owns. And at this point in time, we're just waiting to see what we may need over in that area. Nothing is planned specifically at this point in time. Next slide, please. This is a diagram, a little difficult to read, but what it is on the left side of the picture is Woodman Road. And going north, that red line through the center of the diagram is Black Forest Road. The kind of purple area that you see right up in here, that's our pre-K-12 campus site in Wolf Ranch and Legacy Peak and the Learning Center. What they're doing is doing the study on Black Forest Road for improvements. They have money supposedly in the budget to improve from Woodman up through Research, which is the intersection right next to our school site. And then down in the future, they'll be continuing clear up to the south edge of Black Forest Road with improvements. Next slide, please. This is that's under study at Powers and Research. They have the money budgeted. Construction is supposed to start out there sometime in 2020. Could be later in the year now with some of the disruptions they've had, but allegedly the money is put aside for this project. And our only conversation with our security and transportation folks is we could have Powers and Research tore up at the same time that we have Black Forest Road being worked on. So that could be interesting next school year. Next slide, please. Here's the Liberty High School breakdown, and you can see up there in the projected new construction, over 2,800 homes being projected out in that area. That includes, the Wolf Ranch and the Sterling Ranch areas, and those are two of the big ones in there that are really driving that. You can see the number of students we anticipate being projected as far as new, and on the far right side and the seats available, you can see what we're in need of as far as seats. Next slide, please. Pine Creek High School area. Once again, this is one of the more active areas in the district. Go to the next one, Ann, please. This is the new Elementary 21, the North Fork site. This is just up Thunder Mountain from Pine Creek High School on the right side of the street. This has been a project. We identified this school site many, many years ago as part of the Briargate Master Plan. And of course, have been reserving that site until our need arose. So a lot of planning and long-range development has gone into this particular site. The next slide. I'm sure Henry has shown these to you before. This is basically the proposed site plan there. Next slide, Ann. And that is a rendering of the new Elementary 21 in North Fork. And if you drive by there now, the last time I was out there, they were just barely starting dirt work. Takes quite a while to just come out of the ground because of all the things that have to go in under that building before you can actually start constructing the building itself. Next slide, please. This is just looking to the southeast from the intersection of Old Ranch Road and Milam. You can see often in the distance to the left side of that picture what's going to be Bradley Ranch. It's a little over 300 single-family homes. The other thing that's significant here is where you see that concrete block in the forefront of the picture. That's about where Union is going to come up and hook into the south end of Milam. They're not too far down from there right now. I guess there are some issues resolved that need to be resolved in there about land ownership and the fact that the county road maybe isn't quite within the county easement. So there are some issues to resolve before they can hook Union in. Next slide, please. There's the Pine Creek area, broke down again. You can see about 1,100 single family coming over there in the next 5 years. And you can see the seats that we need as far as seats available and needed in that particular area. Next slide, please. Rampart High School, very stable part of the district. The only residential piece that we've got going right now is this apartment complex is to replace the Sears store at the mall. They would tear down the Sears store, and this 300-unit gated apartment complex will be located just to the west, approximately where the Sears store is sitting now. This deal is expected to close in the fourth quarter of 2020, and you could see construction over there right after the first of the year. Hopefully, this will bring some more vitality to the mall, and we'll keep that mall active over there for a number of years. Next slide, please. Once again, You can see this, the multifamily is not going to bring a lot of students in the district. And in the far right column, you can see the seats that are going to be available in there over the next 5 years. Next slide, please. This is bringing it all together, as I mentioned, as a summary of what it looks like we're going to need from between now and 2024 without modulars and with. And I always tend to talk about with the existing modulars because we have those in the district. They've been valuable to us in the past, utilized to move from school to school where we get a pinch and we need some help with space. One thing I would mention is when you look down the elementary column, and the positive numbers are seats available, negative where we're going to need a few seats. So we're going to need some seats over at Liberty. It's about a half a school. We can address that because overall, we've got seats available in the district. That some people might say that, man, you got 2 extra elementary schools. It's not really true because we have 8 modulars that are located in the Rampart elementary area that could be utilized for additional students, but they're being used for special programs, but we still count them in our facilities available. So we have flexibility within there, but when you look at it in reality, we really don't have 2 schools out there that are extra. In the middle school, we're about 3/10 of the school short, but keep in mind, this is a snapshot today. And if our enrollment, we're down right now, we need to pick all those students back up in order to make all these. And this is the largest experience, the largest number of students that we would anticipate based on the developer's projections. So we're going to come in close to that, but probably a little under. The high school, we show 1/10 of a high school that's being needed. If you go back and add up all of the individual study areas, you'll say, wow, it looks like you're going to need a little more than that. One thing that I've done here is within the Pine Creek and the Liberty High School areas, because we have the new facility for the online learning, the high school program that's over in the old Ent building that we purchased this summer, we've added those seats for the special programs into those schools because truly there's seats available and they're taking students out of our total enrollment. So in reality, we're very close to being handling all the high school students, even with using the most liberal of as far as projections from the builders over the next 5 years. Next slide, please. Not the end. Still have a lot of almost 6,000 single family homes to come and a number of single family attached and apartments. You can see on the right side, additional elementary, middle, and high school students that will come beyond 2024 as far as anticipated from new construction in the district. Next slide, please. Any questions? I'd be happy to try to address them. If we're good, I always appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. And if you ever have any questions of me, you feel free to contact me.
Mr. Smith, thank you so much for your detailed report. I always enjoy it every year. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Next up, we'll have Mr. Wright Wiesner come, and he's going to give us an update on the construction within the district. Thank you for joining us today.
Sorry, I had to unmute first.
There you go.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Henry Wright Wiesner, and you'll see my contact information at the very end. I've given presentations in the past. 2 points of clarification that were made earlier today in today's presentation. So Bob Lund's team, Facilities, gives updates in the late spring heading into the summer of what they're going to try to accomplish, and then they give an update at the fall. So Bob was not recognized as giving board updates. And then the rest shows up in pictures. So let's go forward. This is kind of a history of what we've done to date. $180-some million we've spent so far out of the 240, and this is all of the new construction we've accomplished, remodels and additions we've accomplished, fairness formula, tech, facility audits, but it's all struck through because that's what we've done. This is the current list of projects.
Henry, I'm going to interrupt, or at least on my screen, you're not advancing slides. I don't know if everyone's saying the same.
Got it. All right.
Oh, there we go.
So I got to find out how to advance slides. Thank you. Okay, slideshow from current slide. Huh. All right, so I don't know how to get rid of this piece on the left, but as long as you can see the images, we're going to move on. So it's talking about issuance 1 projects where they're all complete. Advance it. There we go. Issuance 2. So this describes projects that we're currently under construction. You'll see pictures for all of these. The only one you won't see pictures on are stadium work of team rooms and the Pine Creek pool, because we haven't begun those yet. But all the others, the technology, facility audit, TCA, all those outdoor components. Remodels and additions, what have we been doing since the last time we presented? We completed the work at Rock Rimmon Elementary School. Facility audit projects. Examples are roofs that we've completed, several doors and windows around the district, ADA ramps, gates, intercom systems, fire alarm systems. Hold on. There we go. Fire alarm systems, direct digital controls, and the last group of facility audit projects. So these are specific to schools for flooring, furniture, ramps, windows, interior. After we've completed a project, we have the opportunity to come back and do a little bit more remodels. So the first one that we completed last year was Chinook Trail Middle School. So we installed folding panel partitions and some other components around the school. Here at Da Vinci Academy, we replaced some light fixtures, and we worked at School in the Woods, learning stairs, and a sign out at the Center for Modern Learning for the Challenger Learning Center. Current pictures of what we've been working on outdoors. We have removed the old tennis courts, the asphalt tennis courts at Air Academy High School, and we've installing new tennis courts at Air Academy. The reason this lower right picture is so dark is because that's being poured early in the morning. We just had a whole lot of trucks, cement mixing trucks, come on into the grounds there, so we just had to coordinate those components. Other tennis courts are, we moved a old tennis courts, asphalt, at Liberty High School, and are process of putting them in. The concrete needed to cure before we put the plain surface on top, but it's going to be a very durable surface. At the District 20 Stadium, we have removed the artificial turf surface and the running track surface, with the understanding that the CHASA was allowing football to be played in the spring. Then we heard that the opportunity for football to be played this fall. So we did not have this well coordinated when they changed their minds. So we'll have a fully functioning stadium here in the next month with a brand new artificial turf and running track to college level, but it'll sit dormant or be used for other sports in the spring. At Pine Creek High School, we've also removed the running track, the asphalt, put in a brand new artificial turf, and you'll see new goalposts and score lines and the whole piece. They've milled the old asphalt, put in a new drainage system. The new running track surface will be going in next, and this will be ready to be used later this month in October. Elementary 21. So this is just a header for the next 3 projects we're talking about. Elementary 21, as Don was saying, it takes a lot of infrastructure work of what's happening below the grade at the school. I was out there yet this morning, and we have steel going up, and I'll show you a picture that's not included in the presentation. Here's a site plan that describes, Don showed this in his presentation. We're at 11 acres, and it's just northeast of Pine Creek High School. Pine Creek High School is to the lower left of this image, and this is Thunder Mountain and Daydreamer. It's an elementary school of 65,000 square foot, so it's a little larger than Legacy Peak Elementary School. The front door is this sidewalk along here, so that's the front door. On the right-hand side is the library and the gymnasium, and the cafeteria is in the back side. This whole left piece is the cafeteria, the classroom wing. It's 2 stories. Not too different than the 2-story piece out at Legacy Peak. Large parking lot, front door, play area on the back side, outdoor grass field. Over here is the bus lot, and then a preschool playground, preschool parking lot. So in this one, north is up. On the next picture, north is to the other direction, so south is up here. So this is an aerial picture from the end of last week. You can see the profile of the 2-story wing over here. This is the elevator shaft in the gymnasium walls. Parking lot would be here. Front doors, this piece right here. And then the outdoor play areas in this piece. So we own all of this land. Here's some pictures from the end of last week where the gymnasiums are up. The concrete slabs being prepared and actually poured in this picture, and I'll show you a picture in just a minute of other pieces. The old Air Academy Credit Union building was sold. A church was functioning in it for several years, and we bought it from them. And here is the new Village High School. So we've moved the Village High School program away from the Center for Modern Learning and into this old building. We did it just over this past spring and opened it up just this past month. Here's some outdoor images. Here's some indoor images. We had to do some asbestos abatement and brand new light fixtures and ceiling and floors and finishes, but the columns are original. Moved the old furniture over, and students have been in it for a couple weeks now. Here's some more interior pictures on the main level. Interior pictures from the lower level. So real bright and airy. So that was being financed from additional projects. So this is contingency funds that the board had. At the same time, the board also gave us direction to spend money on security cameras and safety and security measures throughout the district. So those have been accomplished. Technology infrastructure was completed on several projects this summer. And we actually advanced several projects from next summer into this year because we had more time and capacity available. The last picture here is for the bond language for TCA's final edition. This is at their North Campus for their physical education program, and their music program is being built. Here's my contact information. Ann has this information for your records and notes if anybody has any questions. And then I'm going to go over to my other image real quick and see if I can get there. I want to show you a picture, so let me get there. There we go. So I want to share this picture over here. So this is this picture from this morning. No one saw this yet, but the gym walls are being complete. They'll be topped out tomorrow, and then the steel arrives. So this steel is going up. So it's really taking shape. So really exciting times ahead. So with that, I want to see if anybody had any questions on the monitor.
I don't think we have any questions in the chat, but Henry, I wanted to say thank you so much for that detailed update. I think that you and your team have done an outstanding job being great stewards with our tax and bond dollars. So thank you very much for the updates that you've been giving to our schools.
My pleasure. I love doing this. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for coming today. Miss Allen is here to chat with us about the impact aid forms that have been coming home. Miss Allen, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to see if it will allow me to share my screen, and if not, Ann also has my PowerPoint here, so we'll see if this works. Ms. Henneman, can you see that?
I can, yes, thank you.
Okay, and if I move it, does it work? You could see
Yes,
it move? Okay,
does.
great. Thank you. Before I start, if I could please just take a moment also to compliment Mr. Wright Wiesner and his team. You know, not only do they continue to do very good work, but they continue to move these projects along despite the challenges associated with COVID. And I just, you know, the creativity and doing everything they do is still in a very safe manner. And so just compliment him too for the work that he's doing despite the challenges that we're facing right now. So thank you, Henry. So I just have a few minutes just to update you regarding impact aid. And as a reminder, federal impact aid is something that started back in the 50s under President Truman. And it's part of our ESSA, which is Every Student Succeeds Act. And that's our federal K-12 law. And specifically, you've heard of different titles, Title IX, Title I. This is Title VII, and this involves impact aid. We are also a member of that National Association of Federally Impacted Schools. We call it NAFIS. And we are also part of something called FLISA, which is federal lands. And Mr. Gregory was also a part of these organizations prior to when I started in this position a year ago. And multiple times per year, twice a year, we have meetings in Washington, D.C. to talk about federal impact aid. And we spend a day at Capitol Hill meeting with our legislators just to advocate for this program and let them know why the dollars are so impactful. This year, we weren't able to go to Washington, D.C., obviously, but we still had our Capitol Hill visits. They were just via Zoom and via Teams. So we still had the opportunity to advocate for this important legislation and efforts that are in place. So just a reminder about what impact aid dollars are specifically for District 20. There are other types, but these are the two types, the two buckets, if you will, that District 20 is eligible for. The first one is Section 2 of Title VII in ESSA, and that's federal land. And the gist of that is that, as you know, property taxes are a pretty significant source of revenue for school districts. But school districts who contain federal lands, we don't get taxes from these federal lands. And of course, the Air Force Academy is a prime example. We actually meet with other school districts across the nation at those meetings I was talking about a little while ago. And there are folks there who represent the areas where West Point is, the Badlands, Mount Rushmore, the Delaware Water Gap, all of these areas that are considered federal areas. And so our property tax revenue is reduced. So federal impact aid, this particular section, Section 2, really tries to replace some of those lost tax dollars. Another piece has to do with federally connected children. And this is Section 3 of Title VII. And this aspect is what ties to the surveys. So basically, we have to share with the federal government, you know, these are the students who have some type of federal connection. Examples are that their families are military and they live off base, or they're military and they live on base, or they work on a federal property, etc. And again, that's where this parent survey comes into play. In a typical year, you could probably already see where I'm going when I started with in a typical year, because we're not in a typical year. We survey every student in District 20. The window starts on October 1st. It ends at the end of the month this year on the 30th. And we hand those forms out at school. Those forms are returned to school. And based upon your feedback last year, you had shared with me that sometimes what you saw was that there was some confusion over forms, that even though one could be turned in per household, sometimes let's say a first grader didn't have their form to turn in because they were on their older brother's form who turned it in high school. but then the elementary student didn't have a form to turn in. So we have really done our best to remind folks that it's okay to take one form per household. If a student says, hey, my older brother turned it in, that we just accept that on face value. And if there's ever an issue that we find, gosh, we didn't get that form or that didn't come in as planned, then we have a way to follow back up with families. So I certainly hope that you're continuing to see kind of an improved process in that area. Now, one of the things that I said is, okay, a typical year. So we're thinking, all right, 25,000 surveys this year in the pandemic. So I'm going to advance to the next slide and show you considerations for the survey. One of the things that happened earlier in June is a bill was put into legislation, if you will, for consideration, called the Impact Aid Relief Act. And it's been included in some of the Coronavirus Relief Fund legislation, or sometimes it's called a stimulus package, and that's how I typically see it in the news. Right now it's packaged in the HEROES COVID federal relief bill. What would this say? What does it say? If it were to pass, and it has not yet gone through the whole process of being in law, if it passed, it means that we could use our count data from last year. Again, because of the challenges associated with COVID, we'd be able to not do the surveys this year, just rely on our data from last year and just move forward. And certainly that would relieve a burden for not only District 20, but other impacted school districts as well, especially with the challenges of many of our students learning remotely. And some school districts haven't returned to any in-person learning. So what's the status? It was passed by the House, but it now is in limbo. The next place that it travels is the Senate. But what you actually may have just been noticing in the news is the Senate is in recess until October 19th. So this act, this HEROES COVID bill, where this impact aid relief is a part of, we're not to the point yet where it will be law. And we just really don't have the time to wait. So we're full steam ahead. If at some point this were to pass, then certainly we will reevaluate. But it's too much of a danger to say, let's just keep our fingers crossed it passes later. Well, I don't like to work that way. I want to work from a level of assurance that we're doing what we need. However, we have to also balance that with the reality of the situation we're in. So what we're using is something that I've called a targeted survey plan. So instead of giving the surveys to every single person, we are giving a survey to families who are new to District 20 because we have no history with them. We don't know if they're federally connected or not. We kind of have to establish a baseline with our new families. Secondly, the surveys are going to our families who were identified in last year's survey as federally connected, because we say, well, there's probably a strong likelihood that there is still a federal connection. If not, that's okay, but that seems like a really important population for them to have a survey again this year. And then finally, those with the zip code, or residents with a zip code for the Air Force Academy. That is who we are getting our surveys to. How are we doing it? Well, for our learners who are in person or hybrid, meaning they are going in person either at elementary 5 days a week or middle or high 2 days a week, we're giving them a survey, a paper survey like normal, and asking them to return it to school as normal. For students who are learning remotely, we are handling that all out of my office. We are literally mailing them the survey in the mail. Not email, but in the mail, and we include a self-addressed stamped envelope so that our families can complete the survey and simply mail it back to us. To give you an idea of what this means in quantity, we have about 8,300 surveys that we need this year that fall into this targeted survey plan. And paper, there's about 6,700. And mailed about 1,600. And so you can just get a sense, and we'll follow up with folks if we don't get something back. but that's the long and short of it. And there was a 20 alert last week. There'll be a reminder in the Friday newsletter that Mr. Gregory sends out every Friday to the community as well, based on a good recommendation for one of our teachers to include that as well. And it'll be reminding parents too that if you think you're federally connected but you didn't get a form, you didn't get anything in the mail, your child didn't get one at school, please contact your school so that we can get you a form. Before I take any questions, Ms. Henneman, you had asked me in the beginning, what happens, you mentioned your husband and that he works on Schriever and right now is working remotely. So I want to give a more detailed answer just in case others have the same question. So it's dependent a little bit on where the person is employed. Are they employed by the federal government, or are they employed as a contractor who works on base, like at Schriever or Peterson? If the employer is federal, even if that person is working from home, they mark that they're federal employees. However, if someone is a contractor and their job site is on Schriever or Peterson, they have to fill out the form basically that connects to their status on October 1st. That's the count day. So if October 1st they went on base and worked on base as a contractor, great, they mark that on the form. But if on the 1st they're a contractor and they did not go on base to perform their duty, then they would not mark that. So that's kind of how that works. And the good thing is that every form that we receive literally gets reviewed, and if we have any questions about status, we thoroughly investigate it to make sure that everything we submit is right on point. So do you all have any questions for me?
Do you think that is going to have a negative financial impact on the district of any significant level with the COVID and the people that are working remotely versus going on to a base?
You know, for those who are contractors, for that particular October 1st date, it certainly could mean that we have, fewer federally connected. But with the 8,000 plus surveys that we're putting out, and we literally, even in a typical year, and we will do the same this year, we literally do contact each family if we have not received a survey, and we'll do that with a personal phone call to talk with them. So we'll do the absolute best we can to limit the impact financially, and we're hopeful that if there is, that it's certainly not significant. And that's why, despite our work now, we're still going to take a look at the legislation, and if something does pass that allows us to use our count from last year, then we'll certainly evaluate, is that in our best interest, or perhaps our survey data collection method this year actually results in more. We just don't know, but we're doing all we can to try to limit any type of impact.
Great.
There's a question in the chat box.
Put my glasses on.
I'm just getting into the chat box here.
They're wondering if they contact the high school, middle school, or elementary school for the impact survey.
And I'm thinking that perhaps they're thinking that, gosh, we should have a form and we don't. Any of those would work. I also would be happy to just give you, if you just want to send me your information, I'm at becky.allen. The only tricky thing is it's ALLAN instead of ALLEN. And I'd be happy to get the ball rolling. So if anybody, it really will work either way, but you're more than welcome to send it directly to me.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you for all your support. This is such an important funding source for our school district, and I just appreciate all of the support around this effort.
Thank you so much for telling us all about it and for updating us on the challenges that you're facing with regards to COVID this year. I hope that everything goes smoothly for you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gregory, would you update us on, I know that you did speak a little bit earlier about the Return to Learn plan. And if you have anything to add to that. Oh, I think you're still on mute.
You would be correct. I did see a question in the chat box around quarantines, and I did kind of leave that out in my comments earlier, that, you know, in all the considerations of when we can return all kids to school, you know, I haven't written them all down. I'm starting a list, but one of them is not just returning, but sustaining. And that's, even in our current environment, we've found that that's been a bit of a challenge. And I know Miss Allen works pretty much daily, or it's become partially her full-time job, is to, you know, do symptom tracing and anything to do with quarantines and isolations. To this point, it's been difficult to keep, I shouldn't say difficult, it's been a challenge to keep all kids in school every day, just from the standpoint of quarantines and isolations, which are, we follow, you know, it's officially, they're called guidelines. I would call them expectations of the Colorado Department of Health and Public Environment for response to symptoms. But that becomes another one of those questions is, you know, if we right now have half of our secondary students in school, you know, 2 days a week, and then the other half, the other 2 days a week, and we have, you know, the level of quarantine and isolation issues that we currently have, what might it look like if we have all students in school every day? And is that even sustainable? So that's another part of the question that needs to be at least considered, along with staffing and data and different metrics. But that's what makes this whole issue just, you know, nothing seems to be a singular argument. There's so much wrapped around it that it's difficult decisions to make. The other pieces are around, you know, social distancing and those kinds of things. If right now we, as I travel around to the high schools and the middle schools, I probably, a good estimate is in a normal classroom, about 12 to 14, 12, 13 students are sitting in a classroom on any given day. If we were to welcome everybody back, that obviously would potentially double, and we'd be looking at, you know, 24 to 26 kids in a classroom, which obviously reduces the ability to distance them per the expectations of the CDC or the El Paso County Health Department, and then also impacts what I talked about earlier with the level of you know, teacher confidence or comfort in being in the same environment. So lots of stuff wrapped around this, and we didn't even mention the mask or face covering component. But I wish I had a simple answer and I could say, look, if we get to a certain threshold on any one metric, that's our trigger to return. But at this point, there is no such single metric out there. So it's a combination of many factors. And then I'll get to that question because I'll need Ms. Allen's help, but the exact question in the chat box was around quarantines, and it seems like maybe it's a bit of overkill. And I believe what that's referring to, and I'll just throw out some approximate numbers, but we're probably at about 2,600 students and staff, excuse me, that have been either quarantined or isolated for any period of time since school started this year. And of those 2,600 or so quarantines and isolations, this number may be updated as of yesterday, I don't know, but I think we're around 6 or 7 positive cases, combination of students and staff. So the question in the chat box is a very legitimate one, is kind of like, wow, that's a lot of quarantines and isolations, you know, for only potentially 6 or 7 positive cases. I'm not reducing the value of those 6 or 7 because those people, it's significant, but just purely statistically speaking, That is a lot of disruption, a lot of discontinuity, not only to education, but to family schedules and work schedules and daycares or whatever needs to happen. Does it seem like it's a little overboard? And we'll let Ms. Allen address a little bit later, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and maybe address some of the specific questions. But essentially, the bottom line is we're following what is expected of us of the Colorado Department of Health and Public Environment. We're following that pretty much to a T, and where there's flexibilities, I'm not sure. I don't think there's a lot of flexibilities, but there are some interpretations. And in many cases, Ms. Allen and what we are calling now our COVID response team works with our local health officials, our El Paso County Health Department, to answer any questions or clear up any ambiguities that may be out there also. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Allen to talk about what all of this means as far as the school district's budget's concerned for the current year, not even projecting into next year yet. Just what is all this? We talked about being approximately 900 students short of our projected number. Then that's on the revenue side. On the other side of the ledger, with regard to expenditures, there's also some components that are important for folks to know. And I would say up front that this is maybe a little bit scary to folks. This does not mean that the school district's in dire financial straits, as long as it's one time and we don't have to sustain this for multiple years. We'll recover from it and move on. But it is a bump in the road, and we just wanted to make sure we were transparent with everybody about kind of the 50,000 foot view at least of what's happening financially inside the school district with regard to the pandemic. So, Ms. Allen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Mr. Gregory, can you see it on the screen okay?
I can, yes, ma'am.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So I feel like prior to jumping in exactly to what things look like this year, I just wanted to give you a bird's eye view of some of the highlights of what we see in our budget this year as compared to last year. So this slide shows you that as we were working through to develop our 2021 budget, I wanted to show a comparison in our per pupil revenue last fiscal year, so school year 19-20 versus this school year 2021. You can see in pink last year's value per student, if you will, the per pupil revenue dollar amount that the state assigned for students in District 20 was $8,055. Well, for this year, we saw a 5% decrease, and that puts it down to about $7,600. What's interesting to note, and not a note that I really am that pleased with, but it is the reality, in that blue bubble underneath the 2021, I want to remind you that District 20 continues to be funded at literally the bottom. If you take all 178 school districts in the state of Colorado, District 20 literally has the lowest funding amount in the state. Now, what does that mean in terms of dollars? So again, this is our 2021 adopted budget. I just want to again illustrate the types of cuts that we needed to make to our budget just to have a budget this year. It's all based on student enrollment, and those student enrollments get really multiplied times that per pupil revenue amount that I just showed you, and that's where our revenue base is established. So if you take a look at this, 1920 right here where my mouse is, or here, this you should be able to see it here. This is showing our actual enrollment last year. And this is where we make projections as to what we think the enrollment will be this current year. And that's all we can do is make projections. It's a variable. We don't know. As we begin this work in January each year, we don't know exactly how many students we will have the following year. We have a team that works on that, and we also rely on a demographer to provide us data as to what they think the projections are as well. If you'll notice, we did estimate, if we look at the non-charters, an increase of about 120 students, which some would say was a very conservative estimate. And back in January, I would agree. Right now, we have a different environment. And this is what our projected enrollment was for this school year. What does that mean if we take a look at the budget that we created for 2021? What it equated to in that budget that the Board of Education adopted for this year at the end of June was about a $9 million reduction. And we looked at different strategies, always with one target in mind, keeping our reductions as far away from kids, from the classroom, from staff, salaries, etc. Those are always our main priorities, to have kids have the top experience that they need and have them far away from this as much as we can possibly be, and staff salaries as well. So now this kind of shows the baseline of what we were dealing with at the end of the year to create this year's budget. Now let's see, where do we stand? Because remember, this slide shows you that our revenue is based on really two big things. One is the per pupil revenue amount. We know what that is. And the other is enrollment. Well, this was a guess. All the data we had at the time, this was our best guess. So if this number gets a lot higher, our enrollment, we bring in more revenue. If it stays about what our projection was, then we get the revenue that we figured we would get. If there is a drop in enrollment, then we will get less money. So this next slide is going to go into, all right, where are we now with respect to revenue? Well, not only in Colorado, but across the nation, enrollment is down. In District 20, we are seeing a decline in enrollment of about 950 students. And you wonder, okay, where? What's happening? About half of that amount that we see in District 20 is families deciding that they would like to formally homeschool their students. The reason I use formally is because they sign a letter of intent with the school district and say, we'd like to do home-based education. Do we think that those families will come back next year? We certainly hope so, but we don't know for sure exactly what that timeline might be. Another phenomenon that we are experiencing, along with many other school districts, that all the ones that I talk to in the area, not only is declining enrollment, but what we see is less enrollment, and we can't account for every student. We don't know every student what they've chosen to do. Some may not have filed a letter of intent. Some may still be just kind of hanging out, waiting to decide, and maybe they're going to come to our school district when they feel that they feel better about, okay, the conditions are safer in their minds and they feel like we want to rejoin. We don't know, and other districts are finding the same thing. So as we go through the October count process and we have specific counts, things will become clearer and clearer, and we will try to chase that data down to just help inform us about where all of those folks have gone. The other tricky thing is that if a family does want to do a letter of intent to homeschool, there's no requirement that you file that letter of intent in the school district in which you reside. So one of our families in District 20 could have filed that letter in District 11 and we wouldn't know it. And they're not doing anything wrong by doing that. So there's still some mysteries there. So what does something like this equate to? About a $7 million reduction. It is something that we're prepared for and that we're starting to just consider so that we have a conservative estimate of where we think this could impact our budget for this upcoming school year.
And that 7 million is in addition to the 9 million that was realized originally in the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. So if we go back to this slide where I talked about this 9 million at the bottom, figure this budget as a done deal, if you will, based on our projected enrollment. Well, because we have that significant decline in enrollment, then we're not going to even get the revenue that we expected. So this gap at the bottom would expand to, if 7 million is the number, let's just say that hypothetically, because our enrollment is lower, then what we would be looking at as a difference from last year's revenue to this year's revenue would be the 9 million plus the 7 million, which is about a $16 million change from last year to this. So certainly significant. So, you know, as you think about how you're budgeting in your own home, you kind of think about two things. How are we doing with money coming into our household? And how are we doing with money going out? So I just talked about the enrollment, and that decreases the money coming in. Let's take a quick look, just high level look at our expenses this year. Well, we certainly have unexpected expenses. The things that I'm going to talk about in a moment, these are things that we certainly could not have foreseen in January. And as we progressed towards the end of last fiscal year, when we were creating the budget, we certainly knew that we would have these nebulous types of expenses, these one-time types of expenses. By one time, I mean, we won't need to buy masks forever, but we certainly need to be spending money on those things now. So these are not recurring costs year after year after year. Once the pandemic ends and we don't feel the impacts, these expenses will go away. However, it doesn't make the expense any less real. When your water heater breaks, it doesn't mean that you're going to have to get a new water heater every year. But when you have to replace it this year, it's a real expense. It's just not recurring year after year after year. So here are some of the big kind of highlights. First of all, we certainly have expenses on PPE, masks, gloves, gowns for isolation rooms, etc. Hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies, plexiglass. We've spent over $100,000 on plexiglass for office areas, classrooms, etc. Now, we do have relief funds. Remember I talked about the second stimulus package? Well, there was a stimulus package last year. Towards the end of the fiscal year, we started getting some of that money in March. And I call it CRF, or the Coronavirus Relief Funds. District 20 received about $10 million, and on a per pupil basis, we also give those dollars to New Summit Charter Academy and to TCA as well. So for us, we have a little over 8 million of non-charter dollars. So we are using some of those CRF dollars to pay for the cleaning supplies, the PPE, all of those pieces. Another piece that we're using this CRF dollars is expenses related to remote learning. Here are some examples. We needed more devices. We ordered $4 million worth of laptops. That's 11,000 laptops. People are buying laptops all over the place. We placed our order about as early as we could months ago, and we're just hoping to get them in December because this is a hot item. Dell is way behind in just delivering on these orders because the demand right now is so high. We're hoping to get them in December, but we couldn't even get them immediately, again, because of the demand. You can imagine every school district is looking for items like this. Wireless microphones, we got well over 1,000 of those so that we have them in every classroom to help our teachers who are remotely teaching so that they have a quality product to help project their voice and all of those to those who are learning at home. A lot of work for professional learning for staff. We gave stipends to our staff members for all of the time that they have invested in taking additional coursework that Learning Services developed within District 20 to learn pedagogy associated with teaching remotely. It's not just, oh, let me just do the things exactly the way I've done them in an in-person format. There's changes and things that need to be considered to make sure that our lessons are the best they can be. So we've certainly expended dollars on that. And that's also coming out of those CRF funds. Now, the thing about the CRF funds is, remember the 8 million or so that I mentioned that we have as a non-charter? The last day that we can spend those is this December 30th, not the 31st, the 30th. And so we have to be thoughtful about, all of the expenses that we incur. And the next one, this is going to come into play. For remote learning, we also have curriculum costs. We have curriculum for students at Journey K-8. We use Accelerate curriculum, which is remote learning curriculum at the high school level. We use Play-Doh at one of our high schools as well, and all of those are remote learning tools and platforms for our students to utilize from home. Well, we can use CRF funds to support that. But the interesting thing is that even though we pay for the subscription now, we're only allowed to use CRF funds for the portion of the curriculum that would be used through December 30th. In other words, our general fund, the typical place where we pay for things, has to cover these costs in January, February, March, April, May, and whatever we go into June. So we can't charge all of it to CRF. Same with some of the staffing needs. When 2,500 students are in Journey K-8, we have to staff those slots and those classes. And certainly those have implications because we're hiring staff for those positions. Some of our staff in our brick and mortar schools went to Journey K-8, and so we have to put staff back in that brick and mortar school. So all of those costs as well are COVID related. And I have here CRF question mark for two reasons. One is we don't know exactly how much of these dollars we'll be able to use on the staffing costs because we are using these dollars. There is no doubt that we will use all of it. We are not hurting to spend the money. So I may not have a lot of CRF to put towards it. The other note that I want to mention with CRF, again, with these staffing costs, can't charge anything past December 30th. So the costs that we have for January, February, March, April, these staffing costs, they would be absorbed in the general fund unless there's some other type of stimulus package that gets put into play. So when we think about this, what type of monetary, I just want to give you kind of a breadth of the expense here. So I'm not really counting the first two bullets, the cleaning supplies and the laptops. Those are covered with the coronavirus relief funds. So we're not considering them kind of chipping away at our budget. However, the curriculum, the staffing, those pieces, we really are looking at several $1 million for those pieces as well. And so when you put it together with the revenue decrease because of the decrease in enrollment, so we'll get less revenue from the state, and then you couple it with these expenses, the extra expenses for curriculum, the extra expenses for staffing, we most likely will be looking at a $10 million, $11 million unexpected, if you will, expenses. Now, Mr. Gregory was very kind. I appreciate the fact that he brought up in the beginning, because I'm going to skip to this slide because I think it's an important one. We will weather this storm.
Exiting.
And I would say this, this truly has nothing to do with me. This is the long-term fiscal prudence, conservative approach, very forward-thinking of Mr. Gregory and others on cabinet who have preceded me doing this work. District 20 is financially secure and stable, and there is a storm. And certainly we are going to have expenses. It will be a very tight budget year. It will be a challenging budget year next year, but we will weather the storm. It is something that we will get through, and we will absolutely come out the other side, but there are going to be some challenges that we haven't necessarily had to face in recent years. What do I mean by how will we get through it? Well, we may be using some of our reserve dollars, other strategies. Again, for any cuts that we think we would need to make, we always go back. Keep it away from kids, the classroom, and teacher salaries, staff salaries as much as possible, and that won't change. The last topic I have, and then I'd be happy to take any questions, is you might be thinking, how does this impact school budgets? So if you do know or perhaps don't, this is a reminder for those who do and just a bit of information for those who don't know too much about this piece. What I'm referring to is something that we call a discretionary budget. So when I was the principal at DCC, I received budget dollars each year that weren't tied to salaries and things of that nature. It was discretionary. It was something that I could spend and best decide the use as the principal at my site on how to spend those dollars. So each year, at the beginning of the fiscal year, schools get their budgets, and they are based on their enrollment projections. So we take the enrollment projection and we take 90% of that. And that's the amount of money that our schools get as a discretionary budget. Now, right now, we're in October count. That's where we take our official counts, and those counts will eventually be certified. And so later on in this first semester, we will have official counts, and we do kind of what I call a true up. We see, okay, this is how we funded each school based on 90% of their projected enrollment. Where is their real enrollment? Well, the good news is that if the real enrollment actually is lower than the 90%, we hold those schools harmless. We don't say, you owe me back $5,000. Schools and principals, you know, they get that money at the beginning of the year. They very diligently look at how they want to plan for that spending. And many principals just kind of look at that 90% and set their plans. And so we do not want to recapture those funds. And if for whatever is above that 90%, we give those additional dollars then to the schools so that they're trued up with their actual enrollment. I will tell you, I think this year, by what you've seen so far in our decrease in enrollment, we will most likely not have a lot of schools who go well above that 90%. Their enrollment levels now may even, their 90% funding may even be higher than what their current enrollment actually is. But again, we hold schools harmless on that. The other variable in all of this is, of course, that there's about 2,500 students at Journey K-8 from our K-8 schools. And at each quarter, our families say, you know what, I'd like to transition back to my brick and mortar school. Or some of our students in our brick and mortar say, I'd like to transition to Journey K-8. Well, by the time we have our certified counts, what we will do, because all of the official numbers that we use to true up the school budgets are based on October count. That's right now. So they don't really reflect what's going to happen in a few weeks when we have some schools transition in and out of Journey K-8 for the first quarter. So what we will do, this is something that wouldn't typically be done. We would always just use our official count. We'll look again later. And if there was a significant influx of students back to their brick and mortar school, we'll see if that's a significant enough impact to warrant some additional dollars for that school. It may not be significant enough. However, we will certainly go ahead and look at that. So, does anyone have any questions for me? That's kind of a big picture overview of where we are right now. We certainly expect that there will be some challenges for next budget year as well, but as that slide said, we will certainly weather the storm.
Miss Allen, thank you so much for that information. To know that we have the lowest per pupil funding in the state, and yet we're a distinguished district is just heartwarming as a parent to know that our administration and our teachers and our parents are putting so much time and effort with the least funding in the state. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that kind comment, because you're absolutely correct. We truly have the best staff and parents and the best kids in the state. And what you said, I really appreciate that on behalf of everybody. Again, all of those stakeholders, our staff, our students, and our parents.
It's a team effort, and we sure do have a great team here. Thank you all. Mr. Gregory, we did have 4 questions in the chat. The first one goes back to about 12:33, and it was regarding football and sports in general. It says, since football players are being allowed to stay home and do in-person learning for their season to avoid having to miss games due to quarantine issues, and did not make the official pullout for the entire quarter, is this how it is going to be for all athletes going forward, where they can pop in and out of in-person learning depending upon their sports schedules?
It's a good question, and I can ask Dr. Smith here. I told him that I projected when CHSAA announced that they were going to put sports back in place this fall, that this would be the maybe prudent thing for parents and students to think. The answer to the question is it's up to the principal. So that's the communication. There's not a district mandate on allowing or disallowing students to kind of choose to remain fully remote or what we call synchronous in their classroom, or that they have to attend on the day they're supposed to attend. That's up to each school, and I do believe that even if they started with being pretty strict with that, that some of the changes, whether it's sports schedules or otherwise, they may start allowing, or I know some of them have started allowing students, athletes or otherwise, to kind of change their mind, if you will. That if they're an A cohort student, so they have a seat waiting for them in their classes on Monday and Tuesday, that they could choose to attend to those same classes, but do it from their home. And as you said, it's with regard to athletics, I believe the thought behind that is, look, this quarantine stuff is happening everywhere. The numbers I just gave, 2,600 students and staff have been quarantined. Does it make sense for me to attend school in person? The example I'll give is we had a tennis player who I can't remember if it was regionals or state, but no, sorry, not tennis. It was golf. We had a golfer who the state golf tournament is 2 days, right? You play your first round on, say, Friday and the second round on Saturday. On Friday, participated in the state golf tournament. First of all, qualified, and then participated in the golf tournament on Friday. Got news that he was part of a quarantine on Friday afternoon and was disallowed from participation in the final round on Saturday. Significantly unfortunate for that student when, whether you're a sports person or not, that's a significant event for that student. And I'll use the word crushing. It was probably crushing for that student not to be able to participate on the final day of that golf tournament. Hence, this idea or this thought of, wow, maybe it's better if I don't attend school. I attend my sports practices after school. So as long as the quarantine doesn't stem from the sports practice, at least I'm not going to be singled out, or only certain players singled out from not participating. And if you use football as an example, there's one game a week. So you practice all week for that one game, and then something happens in a classroom with a student or a staff member who causes a quarantine, and now you're unable to participate that week in any sporting event, whatever it is. So I know that's a long-winded answer to it, but certainly have those discussions with the principal at that high school. Know that they are certainly aware of this, and I certainly would support something like that. We're in a time where everything is unprecedented, right? We've never dealt with any of this stuff before. So I think even some of the rules that are well thought out to begin with are rethought about at some point and possibly changed just because it's a morphing situation day by day.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question is the delayed start on Wednesdays affecting our hours of in-person? As bad weather delays do? Curious how that is working.
The short answer is yes. If the start of the school day is delayed by 2 hours, then essentially we count 2 hours less towards the instructional time. So the short answer is yes to that. Again, I would, I don't know what the right word is I'm looking for, maybe beg, maybe plead with the state for forgiveness in this year, because part of that Wednesday concept was make it virtual so that between the A cohort and the B cohort group of kids, our custodial crews could go through the entire school and clean and disinfect, so that the quarantines wouldn't run from, the A group to the B group. We're trying to keep them separated, but yeah, the short answer is yes, that does in fact impact or reduce the number of instructional hours by 2.
Are there plans to query the families of students who are not registered in school to find out their reasons for not coming back?
Especially at the elementary level, they've already started doing that. In fact, they started reaching out to the students they expected to come back this year, but haven't shown up. They've tried to ask them why they're, what they're doing, not to place judgment, just say, are you please know that you have to register as a homeschooler if you're going to go that route, or are you choosing to go to a private school, or are you choosing to attend an online school that maybe not be in Colorado, maybe an online school that's based out of Florida, but it really doesn't matter where they're located. However, they're not going to appear in the Colorado attendance system. So we've reached out that way. As we work through this, certainly we're getting comments daily from parents about their wishes, their experiences. So we're collecting data on lots of data coming out of Journey K families and parents on both. They love it or they're disappointed with it, both sides. But at some point right now, at the secondary level, it's hard to know who those students even are. If we knew who they were, who to expect, we could reach out to them. And secondary schools are just different than elementary from that standpoint. The parents are much more connected to the school at the elementary level than they are at the secondary level. But as best we can, yes, we're going to do that.
Great. The next question is, are you looking at data from private schools who have K through 12 full-time in person to see how they are doing with having everyone in person full-time?
Yes, and I would also put some charter schools in there, recognizing that there are differences. Right, some of them are, some of the private schools or charter schools exist because of class size reductions. So they only typically have 15 students in a classroom, not 25 or 30, which is a difference right there, where they can have all their students in class, and it's kind of equating now to what we have as just one of the cohorts. The other options are, it's just, especially in a private environment, it's just different, right? Parents choose that environment and they pay for that environment. In ours, it's a little different in that we take all comers. Anybody who wants to come to school comes to school. We don't have, we can't, unless there's, for cause, we can't just tell kids they can't come to school anymore for whatever reason. So we're all doing, however, every month we have a superintendent's meeting, and that's not just public school superintendents. That also includes the Catholic diocese administrator attends those meetings, and she represents all of the Catholic schools, private schools in the Pikes Peak area. And there are frustrations that she expresses even with the level of quarantines. That's really the biggest issue is if you have, the more students you have, the higher number of quarantines you're going to have, and that runs just parallel. TCA has had all their secondary students back. Certainly they've had quarantine issues, but they also have, as a part of their mission, to keep class sizes a little bit smaller. And they've made some adjustments too, in that they offer the synchronous class option also. So even if it's all students, it's not really all students, because some of those students still choose to not attend in person.
Okay. Looks like we have 2 questions left. I'm going to take the shorter one first. When do you project the decision will be made on whether or not to make changes to the Wednesday format?
Good question. It would be, what we're shooting for is kind of the start of the second quarter. So I think that would be like the I think the last day of the first quarter is, I don't have a calendar in front of me, like the 16th or the 19th of October. So it'd be right around that date that if there's going to be changes to the Wednesdays, it would happen around that time.
And one other person followed up with another Wednesday. If the decision is made to make Wednesdays a work day for students and teachers with office hours, will that affect the 2-hour issue?
I think this is still about the counting of the time, right? Is what I'm guessing.
Yes. Another parent was wondering when you would anticipate the waiver coming, so we'll combine them.
The waiver will probably not come. We will have to fight for that. I doubt that it'll be like last year and they just grant kind of essentially last year it was send us an email and we'll grant a waiver. It doesn't feel like it's going to be the same this year. We'll have to make it a little bit more formal, but if we can come up with a way on Wednesdays to reasonably and ethically count the time, then we would. It's really based on attendance. Can we approve in any way attendance, or the other word I would use is engagement? Can we show that students were logged on to, let's say, Microsoft Teams or into Schoology? If we can show those kinds of things, then we can prove to the state, if you will, that students were engaged. Maybe it was an asynchronous environment, but students were participating in their education, and look, they logged into Schoology or they had Teams meetings or whatever it is. We can use that in lieu of attendance records also.
The last question that I have in the chat is long, so bear with me. Let's see. Is the use of modulars for classrooms at each school facility still going to be the district norm, not considering the pandemic, even as new buildings are being built? I am a D20 resident and both of my children are learning full-time in modulars at different schools this year. And my elementary child's class will be in a portable again the 21-22 school year, as it has been for 20 years of the school's existence. And neither modular is equipped with plumbing. I know there is much room at newer schools. Will it ever be considered to remove the modulars completely? If it is a space issue during a non-pandemic year, would limiting the number of out-of-district students or funneling them to a more vacant building at the schools who use modulars for classrooms be considered? My child's elementary school is about 30% choice.
Yeah, so the long-term plans for the district is certainly to reduce the number of modulars in use. I'll give an example of both Ranch Creek Elementary School, and this is not atypical across all school districts, but a newer area like Ranch Creek, or a newer school like Ranch Creek or Chinook Trail, who are which were schools built in a newer neighborhood, opened up, and for about 3 years they were just fine without modulars. And then as houses continue to be built and choice enrollment in Colorado is a reality, it wasn't 4 or 5 years after the schools opened where modulars started to appear. So it was brand new schools that also had modulars associated with them. And at Chinook Trail Elementary School and Ranch Creek, they both currently have modulars that are being used. So that's the new school. If you look back at some of the older schools, It's not just a matter of enrollments, it's a matter of student programming. Different laws change over time, different programs change over time. And I'm not excusing the fact that there are classrooms, regular classrooms meeting in modulars, without a doubt. But many of the modulars across the district were once used to house classrooms and are now used for either office space or meetings with small groups of students, or maybe special, smaller special education groupings or one-on-one type things. I wish we could make faster progress on it. The committee that designed or formulated the bond in 2015, that was one of the goals. But even with a $230 million bond initiative, it's hard to get down all of the items that need to be funded. So some progress has been made. I think we've removed or relocated between 10 and 20 modulars over the last few years, but the fact of the matter is there's still a long ways to go, without a doubt. The hard part is funding it, right? You can buy a modular and have it installed and equipped for about $150,000. But to add 2 classrooms onto a school, you're 6-7 times that. So that's the reason for modulars, and the fluctuations in enrollment. Over time you can remove the modular. However, the person who asking the question is exactly right. Many of our modulars have been there for not temporary periods of time. They've been essentially parts of the school for 20 years. There is code too around the plumbing question. There's code around access to restroom and water facilities, essentially. And as long as the modular is located within a certain, I can't remember the number of feet, but a certain number of feet from a restroom, then it's acceptable by code.
It's not always fun in the winter. I remember running in from those modulars at Rampart, and it's cold.
I taught out a really old modular at Rampart for a long time, but it's not ideal from anybody's standpoint, right? The teacher, even when students have to use the restroom in a modular, it creates just that little bit of extra, especially nowadays with all the safety protocols, a little extra disruption to everything that goes on in the classroom.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. That's all the questions that we have in the chat. Does anyone have anything? We've ran over. I'm so sorry, guys. If no one has any other questions, we will all meet again on November 4th. And I'm so thankful to all of you for coming and for participating and for bringing such a wealth of information and knowledge to our students and our teachers and our parents. And thank you all.
Oh, thank you all, being all the parents. Again, as Becky said earlier, the reason that we are a district of distinction is we have good people, and good people means we have good students, we have great parents, and we have great teachers, we have great board members, and we have quality staff members. So it's like I said earlier, it's a matter of teamwork amongst all of us in the school district, not just the teachers, or not just the parents, and not just the students, but certainly everybody together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
Hey, Anne, I think I got all the attendance information, but there were
is now exiting.
There were a few parents who just had numbers, and there was one woman who was signed in as Carolyn, so I'm not sure.
I think I've got it. I'm going to look up a couple of those numbers, but I think I have most everybody. And I'm just going to send you a list of who is present.
That should be great. I should just have to review these notes real quick just to make sure I got everything on here, and I should be able to send them to you